Can everybody hear me? Everyone in the back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Gorge, how are we all doing today?
Good.
That's positive. That's much more positive than I usually get at an O week. Are we feeling nervous? A little? Okay. Are we all excited to begin our new tertiary study adventure? Yes. Fantastic. So my name is Catherine. I'm from the Student Learning Support Service, and in this session, which should go for roughly an hour, I'm going to be going through some essential study skills for university. So this is going to be a short session that is going to throw a lot of information at you. Do not be overwhelmed if you cannot kind of keep up with it, or if you feel like it's not all going to stay in your head. Essentially what the goal is here is to introduce you to the skills that you will learn kind of again and again throughout your university journey. So I'd firstly like to acknowledge that Flinders University, we meet and teach on the lands of the Kaurna people, and these are lands that were never ceded, and we pay respects to elders past and present. So, as I said, I'm from the Student Learning Support Service. Our job at the university is to support your study, to ensure that you can get through your degree with the minimal amount of stress possible. We have a range of support services that we offer. I will go through those a little bit more in detail in the next session if you stick around. If not, you can always go to our website, which is, if you Google SLSS Flinders, this is what will come up. But essentially, we offer support from learning advisors like me. We also offer online study resources, so these can be PDF guides or videos, and then also workshops and modules. So things that you can go through at your own time, in your own pace, or come to a room very similar to this one, and we can go through things like referencing or essay writing or paragraph structure, anything that you might need to help succeed at university. So let's start with essential study skills for uni. These are the main things that you're going to be keeping in mind throughout the kind of journey of your degree: thinking, reading, writing, referencing, and time management. Have we encountered any of these things before? Thinking, I hope, yes. Time management, I'm sure we've all had to deal with this at one point or another in our lives. The goal here today is to introduce you to some tips, but really the goal is to introduce you to some common language that you're going to find throughout your degree. Things that, as I said before, will kind of come up again and again, and this is to introduce you to them for the first time. So let's start with critical thinking. Hands up if you've heard the phrase critical thinking before. Yes, I'm sure you're all geniuses at it. Critical thinking essentially is staying conscious of our thinking. And this is something that you're going to be asked to do again and again at university, when you are in tutorials, when you're doing your readings, when you are really engaging in any kind of university content. The goal is to be critically thinking about what it is that you are engaging with. So this also means confronting and interrogating any beliefs that you might walk in the door with, and also objective analysis and evaluation. This is at the heart of university study, and it also helps us to formulate constructive arguments. Now, argumentation is possibly the biggest skill you will learn at university. And when I mean an argument, I don't mean like with the parents across the dinner table. What I mean is academic argumentation. So at university, academic arguments are one of the ways you hone and develop your critical thinking skills. And constructing an academic argument requires you to think about all angles of a potential issue. So that is pros, cons, strengths, and weaknesses of particular ideas or theories. And the most important part of critical argumentation is critiquing ideas and then unpacking them. So an argument at university should look something like this. We have a claim, we have a justification. The way that we justify our claim is with evidence, and this creates the academic argument, okay? So you can think about arguing like arguing at university like there is a court, like you are kind of engaging in a court case, okay? So your claim is your initial statement. The justification is how you back up that statement, and the way that you justify things is through evidence. And that might be research that you've done. There's room up the front if you want to come down. That might be, your evidence might be research that you've done. It might also be statistics. It could be an experiment that you've run in class. These are the ways that we kind of create academic arguments. And critical thinking is, as we said, as we know, very key to academic arguments. And it's the capacity to understand and evaluate the work of important researchers. So how many of you have looked at flow yet at your Canvas pages? How many of you have just skimmed over the amount of readings that you have? A few of us, yeah? All of these are academic arguments. And your job as a young academic is to understand and evaluate this work. So this is the capacity to critically analyze literature. So that means identifying and analyzing arguments, evaluating logic, evaluating evidence, and assessing knowledge claims to see how strong or weak or convincing they are. So if we go back to our what is an argument, this is a similar way that you can critique other people's arguments. So do they have a claim? Is their claim justified? How do they justify that claim? This is the kind of work you can do with other scholars or with the readings you engage with. But you also need the capacity to reason positively in an academic environment. So this is essentially knowing how to make your own claims, or if you have them, not being afraid to share them in front of your peers in class. Also presenting strong arguments, which we do with justifying our claims with evidence, acknowledging debates, and then also acknowledging our limitations. So understanding that every kind of key argument that we might have, people will likely disagree with us, and being able to acknowledge that disagreement is a key way to understand your critical argumentation, and also acknowledging the limitations. So every study has limits, every idea has limits. For example, if you're writing a research paper, a limitation is likely that I cannot read every single piece written about this idea, right? There are always going to be limits to your arguments, and it's really important that you understand that. Feel free to come down if you'd like to come down. So, once we are kind of in our space of understanding that at university, it's really, really important that we understand how to reason. It's really important we understand how to think. The majority of ideas are going to be coming from our readings. So I'm glad at least some of you have looked at where your readings are located. But if not, readings are going to be a big part of university. So just hands up if I could get one person to tell me, how do they read? I read really quickly. I do Audible sometimes on 2 times speed because I get bored quickly. Do you read quickly? Do you read slowly? Yes. Do you read for pleasure? Some people. Do you read because it's your friend recommended a book and you feel like you should probably read it to get in on the know? Yeah? So we all read in varying and different ways. And the most important thing to understand at university is that when you are reading with a purpose, okay? You are going to have a lot of readings thrown at you throughout your degree. Oftentimes you will have one, at the minimum, you'll probably have one a week for every topic you're in. So that means you have 4 academic, maybe articles or journals to read per week. This means you have to understand how to read efficiently, and the way that we read efficiently is to read with a purpose. So there are a few questions that you should keep in the back of your mind when you start reading, and one of them is, what do I need to get out of this reading? Okay? Am I doing this reading to understand background? Am I doing this reading to understand a particular core argument? Am I doing this reading to help me with an assessment? Am I doing this reading so that I can understand particular methods of an experiment? Am I doing this reading because my tutor asked me to, okay? All of these things, it's really, really important to keep in mind because you might be given some readings that are designed to be discussed in tutorials along with discussion questions, in which case you can read with those discussion questions in mind, okay? So if your tutor has said, read this and then come to class so that we can debate X, it's important to keep that in mind as you're reading. Also, if you have a few different readings for the week, but you know the tutorial is going to be focused on one particular topic, read with that in mind, okay? You will find out very quickly that academic texts can be very lengthy and very verbose, okay? As an academic myself, I often find myself writing in tangents, in circles, and it's important when you are reading academic writing to understand what parts are important and what parts we can potentially skim over and come back to later if they become relevant, okay? So read with ideas in mind and read critically. You can also think about what you already know in relation to lecture content or any other information you've come across. It's very likely that the first time you are encountering an idea won't be in your readings. Okay, so if you feel really stuck when you're engaging with a reading for the first time, it is often a good rule of thumb to check back in old lecture content, check back through old tutorial content, and likely you've been introduced to the idea in some sort of way, and this can really help to refocus your reading. And also, if you achieve any milestones for your reading, reward yourself. It can be a very demanding thing to sit down with no phone, no background music, no TV, and focus on something with the intent of critically analyzing it. It can take up a lot of brain space. So maybe when you're done with a page, you can have a lolly, or maybe when you're done with the chapter, you can doom scroll for 30 minutes or whatever feels good to you. But a 5-point reading plan can also be helpful. So predicting, skimming, scanning, analyzing, and noting. This is the reading plan that we at the SLSS typically suggest you go with. So use knowledge like the title, the abstract, and your purpose for the reading to predict whether your book/reading will be relevant to what you want to get out of it, right? So if you're writing for an assessment, okay, and your assessment has very specific research guidelines or a very specific question, predict whether or not the article will even be relevant to start off with. The second thing to do is skimming. So skim through the article, let your eyes kind of bounce and jump around on the page until you find keywords that relate to your topic. This will again help you to understand whether this reading will be relevant and how relevant it will be. If your skim is relevant, you're finding enough of those keywords, then you can start scanning. So essentially read the introduction, read the conclusion, okay, or read the abstract. And then you can also read the first sentence of each paragraph to understand where you should focus your attention on. And then finally, you can start analyzing. So if we see that these sentences or the intro/conclusion are relevant, this is where you can spend more time on analyzing things closely. So I think a lot of people go into academic reading believing that every single word is relevant. It isn't. You can let yourself skim over the page and find the things that are relevant to you and your topic. And this will cut down on the mental burden of engaging in so much new content, especially when you're new to reading academic texts. I find this can be really helpful. And then you bring out the notebook or your notes app or take a photo or whatever, and this is when you start noting. So noting down key ideas and why they're relevant. This second part of the equation is so important. I cannot tell you the amount of screenshots of readings I have in my phone that I have no idea why I put them there, right? So keep a record of exactly why you've chosen to highlight something, why you've chosen to note something down. And if you need to use that research in an essay or in a further assessment, it will only help you 10 times more. And then there are some things you can ask yourself while reading. So what is the aim of the author? What message is the author trying to send? What are the main arguments? So again, some critical engagement, breaking down what exactly the author is trying to argue here. Are the arguments supported by evidence? Hopefully yes. But is the evidence reliable? So you can always look to things like their reference list and go, do I buy where the research is coming from? Did the author influence your opinion? And if they did, why? And if they didn't, why not? What are the limitations of this study and what do other researchers say? So if a person is writing, 100% of first year students that come to O Week are successful, well, what's the sample size? How many people did they interview? Is their data qualitative or quantitative? These are all kind of questions that we can ask. And then finally, how can you use this information from the text for your assignment? So you will usually be reading to inform a written assessment or a discussion in your tutorial. It's always important to keep in mind, how can I use this to further inform me, either for an assignment or for a discussion? And if you need more help, we have some really good PDF guides and videos under the Reading and Critical Thinking heading, which is on our flow page, which is linked on the website. So let's move on to writing. How many of us have experience writing for anything except pleasure? writing emails, writing briefs, writing reports, writing essays, writing for high school. So a fair amount of us. So writing at university may seem intimidating, but honestly, it is a culmination of simple, professional writing style. So academic writing will allow you to demonstrate these critical thinking skills and your reading skills that you are geniuses at now, because I've told you how to be geniuses. And academic arguments are really key to the way that you write. So most often you'll be presenting an argument in your written work. And so we need our claims, we need to justify these claims with evidence. But there are also many forms or genres of academic writing. So the process of tackling a written assessment remains fairly consistent, okay? And the way that we're going to tackle our assessment is through thinking critically and having our readings done. So this is our kind of guide, step by step, to how we want to approach written assessment at university. We want to start with analysis. And this is going to be analysis of a question. You will always be asked a question at university or be given a phrase to discuss. And it's your job as the writer to interpret or analyze what exactly it is that your tutor is asking from you. We can then move on to our scoping and brainstorming. So this is our time where we take notes, where we do Google searches, where we pull up Google Scholar for the first time, where we literally scope for research anywhere. Then we move on to our planning, which is where we take all of that information that we've just gleaned and figure out how we're going to put it into the structure of academic writing. Then we're going to write it, which is honestly the least important step in this whole process, because the most important is editing and proofreading it, okay? I cannot tell you the amount of first drafts that I have polished from garbage into gold throughout my time here. So we start with analyzing. And analyzing means breaking something down to its component parts to see how it works as a whole. So you'll be doing this when you do your readings. You'll be doing this when you start your critical thinking. It's about how we can look through the structure of something to understand how it's functioning. And the way that we do this when we're asked a question at university is to look for content words, limiting words, and instructional words. So if these seem unfamiliar to you, they did me as well until I started, but content words are words which relate to your topic. So these are words that will often mirror things like your topic name, things like the names of the reading, the headings of lectures that you've been at. Limiting words are things like dates, things like timelines, things like area, things like geography that limit the scope of your argument or your research. And then finally, your instructional words will be the words that instruct you on how exactly your teacher would like you to approach the question. And you may not feel like there is much difference between discuss, analyze, or examine, but if you start to research into what those words mean, you'll find that there is a subtle difference in the way that you need to approach your written text. So, this is an example of an essay question. Higher education should be free for all, discuss. Okay? So, we look for our content words, and these are words that relate to the topic or our main discussion points, and those would be higher education and free. Okay? So these are the words that are telling us exactly what it is your teacher would like you to write about. Okay? Then we have our limiting words. This is words that narrow the scope and make parameters more specific. So for example, higher education. Without the word higher in higher education, this would read education should be free for all. Then we would move from discussing university to also having to discuss high school. We'd also have to discuss primary school, maybe even kindergarten, maybe even Montessori. The scope for our research would be so huge. So we need to think about how we are being asked to limit our research. And in this context, higher education. And then finally, our instructional words. In this case, we have discuss. And discuss in this context would essentially mean, let's get all of the arguments out on the table and let's discuss which one we can argue then which one would make the stronger argument. So we would expect when you're being asked to discuss something that you may bring up both sides of a debate or an argument. You might have a paragraph in here which would be a con or a pro, depending on where your research takes you. So then we move on to our scoping and brainstorming. So this is where do we start the process? What resources or readings have you been given? This is the first place I want you to look when you're being asked to engage in research is flow, okay? I am guaranteeing you that if you've been asked to submit a research paper, you're being encouraged to reference the readings that you've already been given, okay? Oftentimes, a good rule of thumb is look within the course content before you start looking outside of it, okay? We can also think about what key terms can you put into the library search. So in this context, free higher education would probably be a good few keywords to throw into the library search. Putting the whole essay question in there might not lead us with the best results because we have a lot of unimportant words clogging up the search. So when we're doing our library search, we want to make sure that we are getting the keywords. And then we can also get a feel for the broader topic and the conversations around it. So this is where you might want to just Google something. Okay, this is where you might want to look at Wikipedia and figure out who's saying what the general consensus is, and from there, once you have your understanding, that's when you can start doing your academic research. So this is just an example of what the library search looks like. And as you can see, I put in higher education, and we have an insane number of results, over 2 million results. So you can imagine that I might want to limit my search a little bit after putting something like that in. But you can also see that in our availability, we have things like peer-reviewed journals or available online. So you can choose the kinds of resources that you would like to get. So your writing. When it comes to your writing, formal but simple language is key, okay? I see a lot of students who in first year, and I fell prey to this as well, believe that they should try to match the writing style of the things that they're reading at university. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a mistake, but I will say there's an easy way to do it, okay? And what you want to do is not to aim to be academic. You don't want to aim to sound like a French philosopher. You want to aim to be understood, and you want to aim to be professional, okay? So you want to use simple language. You want to use the most correct language you can, so you can avoid things like long metaphors or long similes, and you can avoid things like jargon if it isn't strictly helping you to make your point. You also want to avoid generalizations in academic writing. So a generalization would be, everyone here is enjoying what I'm doing right now. Okay, I don't know you. I don't know if you're enjoying it or if you want to leave, okay? That would be a generalization. So we want to avoid things like that in our academic writing. We also want to express ideas using the shortest and most direct words and phrases. So again, we want to avoid these long, flowery sentences. We want to avoid mimicking the writing style of academics, genuinely. Your goal is to be understood. Your goal is to be professional. You can think about academic writing like writing an email to your boss, or an email to your principal, or an email to your tutor, okay? The goal is to be professional and to be specific, okay? So the things that you're going to be learning throughout your degree are going to be really complex. Okay, I know that every single one of you are going to be engaging in really complex ideas throughout your degree. That is what is going to be your kind of academic punch. Your writing can be simple, okay? Let the material be complex, not the writing. And another way that we can make sure that this happens is through editing and proofreading, which is genuinely the most important part of this whole process. So editing is what we call the macro level, so content, accuracy, clarity. Proofreading is at the micro level, so that's mechanics, so spelling and grammar, and you want to explore your strategies for both. If you need help, again, we have a bucket of videos, resources, PDFs, etc. in the academic writing skills. So I'm going to fly through referencing because I realize that I've been yapping for a while. So academic integrity, have we all heard of academic integrity before? Most of us, okay? If you haven't heard of academic integrity, it's essentially the process or the practice of being honest and fair when writing and submitting work at university, okay? And we maintain academic integrity by referencing where our ideas have come from and by being honest as possible in the kinds of things that we suggest. I don't know why that URL is there. That's not relevant. But this is under our values and ethos as a university. We strive to maintain academic integrity. We do not want to engage in academic dishonesty, and that would include things like plagiarism and also misconstruing evidence, misrepresenting evidence, misrepresenting yourself. But the most important way that we can avoid this is by referencing. Okay, a general rule of thumb at university is if you didn't come up with it yourself, someone else came up with it first, and it's important to give them credit, right? So you have to acknowledge the work of others, okay? But we also reference to enable someone to access the same resource as you have, okay? So if you have written something in your essay, I'm marking your essay and I go, oh, that's really cool, I didn't know that. I want to be able to find where you got that reference from so that I can engage in it too. We also reference to show that we've conducted thorough and balanced research, and then finally to meet the requirements of academic integrity and to situate our work in the academic context. And you just reference when you're using an idea which is not originally your own, okay? And we can do that by quoting, or we can do that by paraphrasing, but ultimately we reference any idea that isn't our own. Now, academic integrity is a module that you will have to go through on Flow. If you haven't gone through it yet, I would really recommend doing it before you start classes. So the academic integrity module on Flow is really, really helpful for clarifying and clearing up any misconceptions about what academic integrity actually is. But it's also something that you will learn throughout your whole degree, okay? So it's not something to be scared about. Right? I know that it can seem really intimidating off the bat, being like, oh my God, I don't want them to think I've plagiarized. I don't want them to think that I've done something wrong. Ultimately, we use academic integrity because we want to make sure that we're being as honest as possible in our writing. And it's a really, really good way to make sure that you're kind of keeping yourself on track there. But ultimately, it's something that you will learn again and again and again throughout your degree. And if you need help, we have a referencing and integrating evidence section on the SLSS Flow page. So let's finally talk time management. I know I'm personally out of time right now, but I'm doing the next session, so I suppose it doesn't really matter. But let's think about time management. Most courses are based on 13 to 14 week semesters, okay? So the first weeks of your semester are dedicated to settling in and getting into the rhythm of your study, okay? Weeks 6 to 7 are when your first big assessments are due, and weeks 10 to 14 are when your final assessments are due. This is the general breakdown of a semester. I know that it can seem intimidating, but it's really, really good to keep these kind of dates in mind for when you're planning. So, how to organize your semester. Assignments often cluster around your mid-semester break and the final weeks of your assessment. And how do we cope with this? I don't know, but the best guess that I have is a diary or an online phone calendar to map your weekly schedule, and also a semester planner. FUSA has these. I believe they should be kind of everywhere, but I personally know that they're on level 1 of the library. If you're interested in finding them, they should also be at Flinders Connect. But this is a year-long planner that gives you kind of all of the important dates that you might need, including public holidays and when semesters start. So this can be really, really helpful for planning when things are due. And what I would recommend that you do now is go through Flow, check out when your assessments are due, and just put them in the calendar. It might seem intimidating to do all at first, but it's really, really good to be able to get an overview of what things should look like. And what we want to do is map a plan to completion. So consider the length, the weighting, and the research requirements of each assessment, and work backwards to find out when you want to start work on that assessment, okay? So for example, I'm in the final stages of my PhD. I have my final thesis review due on Friday. So what I did is, when I figured out when that due date was, I put it in my calendar and I said, okay, well, by the Thursday, I want to have a full draft. So that means by the Monday, I have to start inputting things into my timetable. And that means by the day prior, I want to have my research all written out and completed. So essentially that just means working backwards from your due date to make sure you're hitting the goals and the milestones before they happen. So you can include things like planning start date, research start date, drafting and editing start dates. But the most important thing is to try to maximize your time. So your uni timetable will be deceiving, okay? When you look at your timetable with all of your contact hours, you and I both know that these are not the only commitments that you will engage in throughout a week, right? We also might have childcare duties. We also might have work. We also might have things like need to eat, need to go to the gym, whatever it is, okay? So make sure that you're keeping these things in mind when you are making a calendar or a plan. It's more important to be honest with the amount of time you actually have than it is to overextend yourself and book in study time for when the time doesn't even really exist. Okay, so really, really be honest about the amount of time you actually have, and don't expect that you'll be able to study all day Saturday when on Saturday you also have to go to the grocery store and pick up your mum from work and also see your friends. Okay, so be honest and keep these things in mind when you're coming up with a plan. So this is what a weekly planner then might look like. We want to include things like work. We want to include things, we can even include things like social events. We can also include things like travel. Does it take you 2 hours to get here? If so, probably 2 hours you can't be writing an assessment. So keep these things in mind when you're auditing your time. I'll put that back real quick if you want to take a photo. But the other important thing that we want to keep our mind about is being strategic about our schedule. So be honest about what works best for you. I work better at night. I am not a morning person, okay? So I never schedule my study time for the morning. I schedule my study time for 10 p.m., which might seem really horrible to some of you, but it's what works best for me, okay? You also want to study according to cognitive research. So these are 1 to 2 short sessions with breaks. You have to give yourself a break when you are studying. It is when cognitively we start to process information. So it's really, really key that you work for a couple of hours and then step away. And ideally, don't just go on your phone when you step away. Ideally, just take a lap before you start scrolling, okay? But take a break. And then account for life events like travel, working, eating, and then be flexible, all right? Things don't always go to plan. They won't. You can guarantee that they won't go to plan throughout the 3 years that you'll be studying or longer. So keep things in mind. And then finally, have fun, okay? Now, the next session will probably be a little bit shorter because I don't have as much to say about it. But does anybody have any questions right now that they would like to ask me? Yep.
Referring to the referencing you mentioned before, what kind of reference process would you recommend?
So for finding references and keeping notes, or like systems?
Like structuring it in the essay.
Yeah, so that depends on whatever degree you are currently studying. So mostly at Flinders University, we use APA 7, which is an in-text referencing style. So essentially after you have written a paraphrase or you've done your quote, you would do a bracket, your reference, end bracket. But some disciplines at the university use the note system, which is footnoting. This will be laid out by your tutor. And if your tutor says, I don't care what referencing style you use, my recommendation is APA 7 because it's the most popular. It's the one that is used by most disciplines and it's the one with the most resources. So we have a resource about it. A ton of other universities have resources about structuring them, what you need to put in there, and how they kind of function in a text. Does anyone else have any questions? Yep.
Who should we ask for that?
Who should you ask about referencing styles?
Well, AP7, if we just arrive on the campus, where should we go like firstly?
Okay, so if you're confused about APA 7 and you would like help with it, come to level 2 of the Central Library and come to the Learning Lounge. Okay, level 2 of the Central Library, Learning Lounge is open from 11 to 2, Monday to Friday. And mostly what we do is help people with APA 7 referencing because a lot of students struggle with it. Yep.
Some of our classes will obviously include textbooks. Where do we find them?
So they should be available online as readings through the library. So the first thing that you're going to do is when you're on Flow or Canvas, you're going to check the left-hand kind of sidebar. There should be a readings tab on there. Check for your textbooks in there first. If not, what you want to do is likely, I say reach out to your tutor, likely your tutor will tell you how to access the textbooks or where they would like you to go to buy them. Some tutors can give you discounts. Some disciplines have a special discount codes for specific books. So keep that in mind before you purchase. Ask your